Hello, Bruins. My name is Paco Retana, and as one of the directors on the UCLA Alumni Board, it is my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the UCLA Alumni Association. Outside of volunteering on the Alumni Board, I serve as the Vice President of Programs at Wellness, and in my work to provide quality mental health services for vulnerable youth and marginalized communities in Los Angeles, the idea of self-care has been especially prevalent these days, which is why I am excited for tonight's workshop on self-care in these times. So Dr. Crystal Lee graduated from UCLA in 2005 and is a licensed psychologist with a passion and talent for helping people get unstuck and live the life they desire. So in her private practice, the LA concierge psychologist, Dr. Lee currently works with clients throughout California and Nevada. She has been in the mental health field for nearly 20 years and has specialized training and experience in autism, spectrum disorders, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Dr. Lee is an active and respected member of the mental health community, currently serving on the board of the Los Angeles County Psychological Association, Psychologists of Color, and Disability Community Resource Center. Bruins, welcome Dr. Crystal Lee.
Hi, everyone. Let me go ahead and share my screen with you all. All right. So today we are talking about self-care in these times, Self-Care 101. And I just wanted to preface and start by saying, if I mention anything about like client stories, things like that, I'm not talking about specific clients. Usually I'll de-identify the story, or more likely I'm going to use like an example that's actually an amalgamation of many different clients, but presented as one, just to give you some examples and stories to go along with the material. So we have 5 parts to our webinar today. Part 1, starting with the basics, what is self-care? Part 2, why is self-care important? Because sometimes people don't really feel that it's all that relevant or important. Part 3, different ways to think about self-care. Part 4, incorporating self-care into your routine, because I feel like so many people are really struggling with figuring out, like, yes, I think self-care is important, but I really don't know how to actually integrate it into my day or my week. And then part 5 will go a little bit deeper into things, into advanced self-care. So talking about some different tools to use. So starting off, what is self-care? There's so many different definitions that get thrown around. And, you know, unfortunately, self-care has become a very commercialized concept. So you might hear about spa days and doing face masks and, you know, joining elite gyms and things like that. But self-care is really something more basic. It's really taking care of your physical and your mental well-being. And I love this phrase or quote here. Self-care is creating a life you don't have to escape from. And I like that it really encapsulates so many different things you can think about. So, you know, creating self-care within a work environment, creating self-care within a personal life environment, thinking about self-care spiritually, all these different elements, and to create a life that you actually enjoy living and you don't always feel tired or drained by. So just a quick poll, how are people doing with their self-care this year? I've heard some pretty interesting stories about, you know, since the pandemic, really self-care has been a struggle for some people. And then for others, their self-care has been like amazing because they have no commute anymore. They're really able to set some more boundaries around their time. It's just very different. So I've seen like both ends of the spectrum where people are doing really horribly with their self-care because some of the options that they did for self-care are no longer options anymore, like spending time in big groups or going to the gym, that kind of thing, and then others who are doing really well. So I'm just curious to see, you know, who out there how your self-care is actually going, because I think that'll help me kind of inform where to go with this talk. So thinking about why is self-care important? Some people really value self-care and see that it's a really important thing, an essential part of, their life. And then other people are not so convinced. So I like to kind of dig deep a little bit into why self-care is even important. So I really love this picture. I think it really encapsulates why self-care is important. You wouldn't let this happen to your phone, but we often let it happen to us. And self-care is really a priority and not necessarily a luxury. So when you're thinking about self-care, if you think about your battery or your bandwidth, like making sure that you have enough bandwidth, enough in your battery, charge your battery well enough to actually be able to do the things that you want to do and live the life that you want to live. And heaven forbid we let our phones get down to 15%, 0%. We often let that happen to ourselves. So there's some pretty serious consequences to lack of self-care, which kind of points to why it's so important. Definitely burnout. I'm sure a lot of you have felt this before, where if you're not really able to balance things very well, you get burnt out at work. You might even get burnt out on life, burnt out on people, your family, that kind of thing. Irritability. So usually if you're a generally pretty positive or pleasant person, if you're not taking care of yourself, we end up being a lot more irritable than we usually are. And sometimes it catches us off guard. I've had many clients come to me in session and say, I've just been really irritated by the smallest things lately. And usually, these things kind of roll off my back, but like X, Y, and Z is bothering me so much. And then we start diving in and talking about their self-care practices, and they realize like, oh, you're right. Like I'm really not doing that much to take care of myself. So it kind of makes sense that I'm a little more stressed out or that I'm a little more irritable. Fatigue is a big one that sometimes people don't recognize. If you're not taking care of yourself, you get really tired, and it actually influences your physical health as well. So you can, if you're under like chronic stress and not really taking care of yourself, you're more apt to get sick. It could actually have physical ramifications in terms of like your heart health, your brain health, that kind of thing. And then these more emotional impacts, mental health impacts of lack of self-care. So there's a lot of increased anxiety, increased depression. And then if you have an underlying mental health struggle, it actually will exacerbate that. So it can be pretty, there are some pretty serious consequences to not taking care of yourself. I mean, I've seen this so much, especially during the pandemic, where people's self-care routines have changed a lot and have been disrupted because they don't have access to the same things. So then we see a real increase in anxiety, irritability, depression, those kinds of things. So I just want people to remember why self-care is important. You can't pour from an empty cup. I'm sure many of you have heard this or seen this meme or heard this quote before, but really it's so true. So even if you think about like on airplanes, when they tell you, if there's a child sitting next to you, you put your mask on first and then you put on the child's mask, because if you aren't taking care of yourself, you're not going to have any energy or bandwidth left to actually serve others or help others. So it's really important that we are pouring into our own cup in order to give to others. So another quick poll, just thinking about those issues that people can struggle with if they're not really taking care of yourself. I'm wondering if anyone has struggled with these issues, and more likely than not, you'll probably have struggled with more than one of these issues. Very rarely does someone get burnt out and not also have some physical health problems or be really tired or be really irritable. If you're anxious, that can, lead to some physical health problems like stomach aches, digestion problems. If you're depressed, you're definitely going to be more fatigued and sometimes irritable. So these aren't like discrete things. So you can be struggling with all of these things at once, potentially. All right, now I can see the posts, the poll results. So it looks like most people are really struggling with the fatigue and the increased anxiety. A lot of burnout, a lot of irritability, a lot of health problems, depression, like everything, right? Like you've noticed that if you're not taking care of yourself, like you're really struggling, and it shows, which also just kind of points to how important it is to engage in self-care, because no one wants to feel burnt out or really anxious or tired all the time. So this is kind of the meat and potatoes of the presentation, ways to think about self-care, because I know I kind of glossed over a little bit the definition, because there really are just so many different ways to think about self-care. And I'm going to walk you through some different kind of concepts, different conceptualizations of self-care. And I really want you to just take what actually resonates with you. Like some of them you'll be like, I don't really think of it that way. That doesn't really fit with, jive with my lifestyle or how I like to think about things, and others may really resonate with you. So as we walk through these different ways to think about self-care, just kind of pick and choose what works for you, because it really is so individualized. What works for one person in terms of self-care is not necessarily going to work for another person. We all have different needs. We all have different family situations. We all have different cultural backgrounds, different work demands, all kinds of things. So I'm going to start from simplest to more complex. So a really simple way of conceptualizing self-care is a yin and a yang. I really like this idea of yin and yang, where there's rest. You need rest as part of your self-care routine, but you also need things that re-energize you. So oftentimes when people think of self-care, they're thinking more about the resting, like I just need a break from things. I just need to lie down on the couch, decompress, kind of zone out, watch some Netflix, whatever. They really think about those restful things. But if we skew too much towards just rest in terms of our self-care, then we're going to have a lot of issues with lethargy or fatigue, stuff like that. And sometimes if we're resting too much, for those who have struggled with depression, you know that when you're resting too much or maybe isolating a little, it actually can lead to a depressive episode. So we need to balance that restfulness with re-energizing activities. So as part of our self-care, like exercising, getting out of the house, like with the pandemic, like going out on daily walks, maybe doing some jumping jacks or jumping rope at home, that kind of stuff, playing with your dog, playing with your cat, like things that actually energize you. Because when your battery, so to speak, is being depleted, yes, rest is fantastic. Like we absolutely need rest. We have to sleep, that kind of thing. But it also helps to have things that kind of pick up our mood, pick up our energy, and help re-energize us. So this is one really nice, simple way to think about self-care, like making sure you're getting enough rest and making sure you're getting enough re-energizing type activities. So this is another way to think about self-care. I like this because it's pretty simple. It's like 3 columns. So the basics, so thinking about the foundation, so good nutrition, hydration, sleeping, hygiene, exercise. I love that they put boundary setting under basics, because sometimes we don't think about boundaries as being part of self-care, but it really is, and such an essential basic part, because if we're not setting boundaries around ourselves, our time, our energy, then we're really, heading for burnout and just feeling super irritable, fatigued, all of that. Then we have this reaching out kind of category of self-care. Humans, we are social beings, right? So we want to connect with others, connect with nature, do things that we're putting energy outwards, right? So how our presentation, like how we're putting a lot of effort into that, but it actually helps to like actually get dressed, like maybe you wear your sweatpants a little more comfortable, but have your camera on, put a nice shirt on, that kind of thing. Don't let yourself let go completely of all these things, because you'll notice that sometimes it'll start to affect how you're feeling. And this is so true of like people who tend to struggle with depression. So sometimes you'll notice that you might be headed into a depressive episode by you notice that your self-care, your hygiene, how you're presenting yourself is starting to devolve a little bit. But definitely also the connecting with others, connecting with nature, getting out there. And then this concept of tuning in. So it's not all just like putting energy out there. We also like turn our energy inwards. And regardless if you're an extrovert or an introvert, we kind of need all three of these things, but maybe in different doses. So in tuning in, things you can do is like journaling, reflecting on your day, gratitude practices, which I absolutely love, mindfulness, which we'll talk about more later on, doing enjoyable activities, either it being outdoors, indoors, with people, without people, just thinking about, your hobbies, your passions, things that you really enjoy, and self-compassion, which is something we'll be talking about a little bit more later as well. So this is a nice way to think about self-care too, because it breaks it down into categories of like things you can think of. So you have, again, your basics, like the physical self-care. So making sure you're sleeping, stretching, walking, exercising, nutrition, yoga, which actually I think can be in a couple of different categories. That kind of stuff. So making sure you're taking care of your physical health, your physical self-care. Then that emotional piece, so the stress management, making sure you are using your coping skills. If you don't have coping skills, doing a little research, maybe going to therapy and shoring up those coping skills, because right now during the pandemic, there's a lot of stress going on. We're just under chronic stress, right? We're under very unusual circumstances where everything feels a little out of control, really chaotic, things are very tense. So making sure that you have some solid coping skills to handle all of those stressors. Therapy, compassion, journaling. I'm a big fan of journaling. For some of my clients, like journaling really is such a helpful self-care routine. It gives them time to just sit and be a little quiet, and it gives them like space just for themselves where they're reflecting on their day instead of just going. Sometimes slowing down can really help things. Social, so talking about boundaries, we're going to see this come up over and over again. Boundaries are so important. So even those social boundaries, putting boundaries with your family, putting boundaries between you and your friends, setting boundaries with your work, it's like so important. Because if we don't have those boundaries, then we have all this input coming in, all of our energy going out, and then there's no boundary between us and them or us and the world. And it can be very overwhelming and draining that way. Having a good support system. So right now during the pandemic, it's a little tough because we're separated. A lot of us are separated from our loved ones. So we're not able to see our friends and hang out with them. Our family might be halfway across the country. And because of the pandemic, we're not doing holidays together. I know for a lot of people with Thanksgiving coming up, it's quite a bit of a struggle, because all of those holiday traditions that you're used to being with your family and loved ones, friends, it's just not happening. So we need to think about how can we still stay engaged with our support system, with our friends. Positive social media. So social media is definitely a double-edged sword. The internet is a double-edged sword, right? There's some ways where the internet, social media is actually connecting us to other people in a time where we can't physically be with people. So that's definitely a positive. But we also kind of know the toxic side of social media and the internet, right? Like all fake news being spread around, people trolling one another just for the heck of it, a lot of negativity, a lot of online bullying, like all of these things. So really being mindful of how you're using the internet, how much time you're spending online, what kind of social media you're engaging in. So for example, some of my clients, we've talked about finding like specific YouTube channels that they can watch, but otherwise they don't, kind of go anywhere else in the YouTube universe. They have these very set channels that they can go to that are positive, that feed their self-care versus draining them. I've had people delete their Facebook accounts. I've had people go on an Instagram moratorium, stop using Snapchat, those kinds of things. So really just being mindful of how you're using social media, the internet, all of that. We are still, we want to use it to stay connected, but we also know there are some pretty unhealthy parts of social media that can kind of drain us and not feed into our self-care. And then of course, friends, unfortunately with the pandemic, we're not able to physically be with all of our friends, but still trying to be mindful of how we can connect with them. So this is where the internet can be really lovely. We can FaceTime them, Snapchat, we can watch their TikToks or, whatever, read their Facebook feeds, email. There's so many ways we can stay connected with our friends, and even make new friends online through these online channels, like finding support groups online, that kind of thing, where even if you might feel physically a little isolated, you can still feel emotionally and socially connected to other people. So spiritual, this is one that tends to get neglected when we talk about self-care. And for some people, spiritual means like an organized religion. And for other people, it means just time alone, meditating, being in nature, having a sacred space. For a lot of my clients, we talk about, because we're all spending so much time at home, like finding a space that is just theirs and making it feel wonderful and lovely to be in. So, it might have been before you didn't really care what your bedroom looked like because, you only went there to sleep and you didn't spend that much time there. You were always out or at work, that kind of thing. But now that we're stuck at home, taking a little time and energy to beautify your bedroom, make it really feel like this lovely place that you actually want to be. So putting up art or getting new comforters or getting candles, those kinds of things, like really creating this really lovely space that is just for you and is sacred. So you're not going to bring in work into that space. You're not going to bring in like fights with your roommates or your partners into that space. Like that is sacred. It's untouched. It's just for you and relaxing and reconnecting in some spiritual kind of way. Personal things. So this is kind of similar to the tuning in section from before. So things that you do for yourself. So hobbies, being creative, setting goals for yourself, which we usually don't think of as self-care. But goal setting and following through and reaching your goals, that's a big part of self-care. You can see how that would lead to creating a life that you actually enjoy living. Reflecting on your identity, being authentically yourself. That's a hard one, being authentically yourself. But for those of you who have been able to find people or spaces where you really feel like you can be just 100% you, you could probably attest to how re-energizing and amazing that feels. To not be yourself takes a lot of effort and energy. With my clients on the autism spectrum who are autistic, like that's a big deal, like constantly having to mask and the energy that goes into having to camouflage and pretend to be neurotypical when you're actually neurodivergent. It's incredibly draining and can lead to a lot of burnout. So definitely finding ways and safe spaces to be authentically yourself is definitely a great way to engage in self-care. So space, so just making sure you're in a safe space, which sometimes doesn't always feel possible. I know when like the protests were going on, I had some clients who lived near where a lot of protesting and some looting was going on, and it just suddenly felt not safe at all. Staying in a healthy environment, so not only just physically a healthy environment, like no lead or asbestos, that kind of stuff, but a healthy environment emotionally too. So like the people you're surrounding yourself with, is that a healthy environment for you? Or are you, kind of stuck in this toxic environment that's really draining? Stability. So for some people, stability, consistency, structure, like that is like their favorite kind of self-care. It makes things feel manageable and less overwhelming. So for those, like having stability is such a big part of self-care. So creating those structures, those consistencies, those routines, and then just a clean space. So you might notice that sometimes when your life is feeling a little chaotic, your living environment starts to reflect that chaos. Or if you're feeling a little depressed, you'll notice that your room kind of starts looking a little less, less neat and definitely more messy, like clothes all around, that kind of thing. So keeping a clean space, a neat space, that can really contribute to self-care. Though I know sometimes people think, well, that's work, like keeping a clean space or a neat space, like that takes work and energy. And that's true. Self-care isn't always like feeding energy into you. Sometimes it's expending energy in order to create a life for yourself that you enjoy living. So sometimes you are going to have to do the hard work of setting boundaries or cleaning your room or working on your goals, that kind of stuff. Like self-care isn't always easy breezy, sunshine and rainbows. Like it does take effort and work. So financially, this is something that we typically don't think of in terms of self-care, but really is an important part. So, if you think about wanting to create a life that you enjoy living and is worth living, having financial security is a big part of that. Paying your bills, money management, budgeting, saving. If you don't put forth the effort into doing those things, then you can imagine how stressful and draining that can be. And then finally, the last category, work. So time management, work boundaries, taking breaks. Like the time management piece is definitely one of those things where it requires you to expend some energy in order to possibly save some energy later on, or expend energy in order to create a life that you actually enjoy, rather than if you're procrastinating all the time or putting things off or forgetting appointments, that kind of thing can be really stressful, and create a life that is not very pleasant right now. So putting in that work, putting in that energy to actually manage your time in a way where things feel manageable and not stressful and chaotic and overwhelming. So I like to think, this is kind of my conceptualization of self-care. I like to think of it as a pyramid. So we have the foundational things on the bottom, and then as those things are kind of taken care of, then we can move on to these higher level acts of self-care or categories of self-care. So we start at the very bottom, our physical needs. That's absolutely essential foundation, right? If you're not physically taking care of yourself, then it's really hard to even think about these higher order things. Same with physical and mental safety, relationships, and at the very top, esteem needs. And I'll explain all of these things as we go through. So physical needs. So we kind of touched upon some of this already. So on the bottom corner on my screen, like a picture of someone like running up the stairs. So that's meant to represent exercise, right? So physical activity. So, how much you exercise, how much physical activity you do, that actually makes you feel like you're taking care of yourself. That's very person dependent, I think. So there are some people who like really need to run 5 miles every day in order to feel functional like themselves. And for someone else, running 5 miles a day sounds like absolute torture, but they have online Zumba classes, or they have a Peloton or something like that, where they really enjoy that kind of thing. For some people, it's as simple as just walking every day, taking a walk for 30 minutes to an hour, something like that, just like moving your body. So when you think about exercise, it doesn't always have to be like hardcore exercise. It's just like moving your body, staying physically healthy in that way. In the top left corner on my screen, there's a little thermometer, and it seems kind of silly to think about, but our physical needs are really, temperature is such a big part of it. So if you are constantly cold or constantly hot, um, you're going to be pretty miserable. So even just like setting the temperature in your living space to be optimal, like can really be a big part of like taking care of yourself. I know that when I wake up in the morning and it's freezing in my room nowadays, if I don't, turn on the heat and bring the temperature up, I'm going to be miserable for the rest of my day. And I'm not going to be my optimal self. So like that temperature thing is really important. In the summer, when we had that wacky heat wave, like being able to stay comfortably cool, like that is part of the self-care, because I'm sure if you were sweaty all the time and super hot, like you're going to be miserable, you're going to be irritable, you're not going to be your best self. So it's kind of silly to think about it because it's such a basic thing. But it is an actual like important thing to think about, that just in that very bottom foundation, like your physical needs. Then thinking about food, nutrition, what you're putting into your body. And again, this is so person dependent, but really just thinking about making sure you're getting like the right nutrition, that you're getting all of your vitamins, things like that. I like to talk about eating the rainbow, which this picture really nicely encapsulates, but really thinking about what kind of foods make you feel good and what kind of foods make you feel kind of crappy. So I've talked with clients about, they start to notice like, oh, when I eat this certain thing, like I always feel really crappy. Like I love eating cookies in the moment, it feels amazing. But then later in the day, I have a huge sugar crash and I'm miserable. So part of the self-care is doing that hard work. It's not fun necessarily to think about nutrition all the time. And it's more fun to eat the cookies in their case. But doing that work to really think about the nutrition. I've had clients where they weren't getting all the vitamins that they needed, and that was leading to a lot of fatigue and irritability. And it's funny to think about, just eating differently or taking your vitamins or whatever, like that could actually get rid of like all that irritability, all that fatigue. It can suddenly give you energy again. So that's absolutely like a really big part of self-care. And then of course, sleeping. Sleep is so important. And again, this is really person dependent, because we hear all the time like, oh, you need like 7 to 8 hours of sleep. I know people who thrive and do so much better on like 6 hours of sleep. And then I know some people who need a minimum of 9 hours of sleep to function. The best way to figure out how much sleep you actually need is to take a weekend, don't set an alarm, and just sleep in, and just sleep until your body naturally wakes you up. And then tracking over time, like about how many hours is that? And you'll figure out like, oh yeah, I am a person who needs 8 hours of sleep, or I'm a person who really only needs 6 hours, or I need 9 hours. And then once you know how much sleep you really need to be functional, that's what you really want to aim for throughout the rest of the week, and really try to protect that. So if you know you need 9 hours of sleep in order to function, then you really need to set boundaries around that and protect that, because you know that if you have too many days in a row not getting the adequate amount of sleep, you're going to become really drained. You're going to be super fatigued. You're probably going to be irritable. If you tend to be anxious, you're going to notice your anxiety ramping up. If you tend to tend towards depression. You're going to notice that your mood is starting to really take a nosedive. So these 4 things, as basic as they sound, like they're basic because they're the foundation. You really need to pay attention to these things and before even thinking about the other pieces, because if your health, your physical health, your sleep, your eating, exercise, temperature stuff, if that is all out of whack, it doesn't matter how social you are and how much you feed yourself spiritually, like you're still going to be struggling in a pretty big way, probably. So next we think about physical and mental safety. So physical safety, I mean, nowadays, like with the pandemic, yeah, it's a pretty prominent thing that we think of, right? So, wearing your mask, physical safety, making sure you're in like safe relationships, that kind of thing. And mental safety, I think a lot about like boundaries, like emotional boundaries. So when you're thinking about boundaries, I like to talk to my clients about value-driven behavior, because sometimes it's hard to think like, where do I set these boundaries? Sometimes it can feel a little arbitrary. So when I talk about value-driven behavior, think about the things you actually value. Do you value your relationships? Do you value, spending time with your family? Do you value getting your work done? Like, think about those things first and then decide your boundaries after you know what your values are. And you're deciding those boundaries based on those values. So really thinking about everything you decide for yourself really being driven by your actual values, like not taking into consideration what you should be doing according to society or according to other people, but really like looking inwards towards yourself. Like, what do you actually value? What is important to you? And I just like this graphic. It talks about, what boundaries can look like. Sometimes when we think about boundaries, we think of like saying no. And yeah, and in some ways we are saying no, but we are saying yes to other things. But so it's not always like a flat no, though no absolutely is a complete sentence. Like, no, you don't need to give anyone like an explanation or something. You could just say no. But these are some other ways that people set boundaries, which doesn't really feel like that harsh, right? So like, I need some time to think about it. I'll get back to you. That's a boundary. I can only stay for half an hour. That's a boundary. It's like, thank you for your offer. Unfortunately, I can't make it. That's a boundary. So setting boundaries doesn't always have to feel or sound punitive or really harsh. Like, if anyone said that to you, I'm sure you would feel like, oh, okay, I get it. Like, you wouldn't be offended, or you wouldn't feel like they're it's upset at you or being punitive in any way. It's like, okay, they're just setting like this very natural boundary. Like, they're just not going to do this. They can only stay for this amount of time. They need time to think, those kinds of things. So sometimes people really struggle with how to frame their boundaries, and how to phrase them. So this is something I like to do with my clients, using I statements. So I feel blank when blank because blank. And then what I need is blank. So I feel upset when you leave your cups all over the house because then I need to take care of it for you. What I need is for you to be really mindful of when you use stuff to put it in the sink, that kind of thing. And you're setting a boundary. You're setting a boundary for yourself. Like, I'm no longer going to pick up after you. And I can't tell you how often this comes up with the pandemic, because now we're all home all the time with our loved ones. And there's a lot of dishes getting left around, a lot of things that, we haven't noticed before when living with someone, because now we're just with someone all the time. So some examples, I feel overwhelmed when every minute of our vacation is planned. What I need is some time to just relax and see what happens. So that's, when you hear that, it actually doesn't sound like a boundary the way that we think of it, where it's like, no, I'm not doing this. It's really just communicating what you need. You're explaining, you're giving some context, but in a non-blaming way. It's not like you. It's like all focused on like, this is me, this is my experience, this is why I feel this way. And then this is what I need instead. So, when they talk about like, I'm feeling overwhelmed, when our vacation is super hyper structured, it's not meant to be punitive. It's just saying like, I need time to relax. And this is my boundary. I need an hour to myself every day that's unstructured or something like that. So relationships. So as I said before, humans, we are social animals. So we really do thrive on relationships. And regardless if you're an introvert, extrovert, like we do need connections. How much connection we need with how many people, that may differ, but just in general, we do need connections. So nowadays with the pandemic, like it's hard because we are all physically separated. And for some people, they're feeling more isolated than ever. So it's really a thought of finding your tribe, so to speak, finding your people. So I've been encouraging clients who might be a little more isolated, who don't have a lot of social support, social network, friends to reach out to, like helping them find other avenues to fulfill that social element. So some of it is like, just hanging out on Reddit. They might not even be commenting and posting or anything, but they're with people who care about the same things that they do, that enjoy the same things, and therefore they feel like kind of a part of a community. So just finding ways to have that connection, fulfilling that need for connection. And then also thinking about who are you connected with, really paying attention to who do you actually feel good being around. So I have some clients where they have some friends that they're friends with more so because they feel obligated to stay friends with them. And it's very, very draining for them to hang out with them or to FaceTime with them. And it's okay to set boundaries around that. Like, I value this friendship, but it's very draining. So I myself am going to choose to put a boundary around this. And I'm only going to hang out with them on or FaceTime with them like once a month, because that's really all I can take. Even if they are reaching out to me a bunch, like I'm going to hold firm to that boundary because I know that's what I need to do to take care of myself. And just something, a reminder, you're not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. So a lot of us are very giving people. We care a lot about others. We want to help others, caretake, all of that. Or we might even be in a profession where we're in that kind of caretaking role. But you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Like that doesn't make sense, right? Because once you're on fire, you're burnt out, then no one's going to be warm. You're going to be completely burnt out. And then the other person is still going to be cold at the end of the day. You don't have to sacrifice your own well-being to help others. And I see this a lot with parents. So, they are putting their kids first. They really want to do everything in service of their kids and really make sure that they're doing well. But taking care of yourself is part of taking care of your kids. If you are not doing your best, you're probably not going to be, being the best parent that you can be to your kids. If you're constantly irritable or fatigued because you're not taking care of yourself, like what kind of parent are you really? And also, what are you communicating to your kids? Like you're communicating to your kids implicitly that you should always, your own well-being is not as important as others. And that boundaries are not important, that you should sacrifice yourself for others. And then when your kids grow up, like, how is that going to come into play? So you need to take care of yourself in order to be the best parent you can be. But you also need to take care of yourself to be a good role model in self-care for your kids. I just really love this picture. I don't know if people remember this little children's book called The Giving Tree. So the tree basically sacrifices themselves in service of this kid. But instead, in this version, the tree is like, nope, we need to set some boundaries. And then the tree was happy, and the tree and the kid could coexist and still be, everything is fine. You don't have to sacrifice yourself in order to, make things right or the best or whatever. And then part of the connection piece, relationships, sometimes is finding a therapist. So for those that are super isolated or maybe don't have relationships where you feel you can be completely authentically yourself, that kind of thing, finding a therapist and meeting with a therapist regularly, like that can make a complete different, a huge difference in your life. And it really is like really great self-care. It's giving yourself, you're carving out space and time to just focus on your own well-being. And like, what an amazing gift is that? And I really like this picture because it gives like a very lovely way of, if you know someone who might need therapy or who could benefit from therapy, like this is a really nice way to frame it. So at the very, very top of our self-care pyramid, we have esteem needs. So I referenced this a little bit in some previous slides. So like setting your goals, doing things where you feel like you're accomplishing things, that you're engaging in your passions, that kind of stuff. And I really like this quote. You often feel tired, not because you've done too much, but because you've done too little of what sparks a light in you. So you might have even seen this in relation to work. So for example, you're working a job that feels really meaningless. You're putting in your 40 hours. It feels like such a drain on your energy. But then you find a job that actually fulfills that itch you have for a certain passion or interest, and 40 hours suddenly doesn't feel like enough time to work on that thing. Like you want to work on it even more, like you're constantly thinking about it and really curious about it. And so it's not necessarily like the time that you're spending doing certain things, but sometimes it's like what you're spending things on. So making sure that you're doing, value driven behavior, but also like engaging in your passions, your hobbies, doing things that make you feel good about yourself, make you feel really competent. So when you think about those different levels, like the physical, the safety stuff, the relationships, the esteem stuff, what level of self-care do you feel like you need to start working on? So for a lot of people, like the physical stuff, they don't even realize like, oh yeah, I'm really not attending to the physical stuff very well. And once they start paying more attention to that, they actually start feeling like amazingly better. It's so funny. Like it's such a basic thing, but it's not always something we necessarily think about because it is so basic. We're paying more attention to the relationship stuff or the esteem needs or setting the boundaries and that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting to see to see like where people will end up on this kind of hierarchy, like what are you needing to work on? Oh, this is so interesting. So it really seems like it's a pretty even spread amongst all of the different levels, though there's a slight majority, I guess, more people thinking about their physical needs, which is kind of what I've been seeing in my practice also. So incorporating self-care, I know I'm running low on time, I apologize. I'm just so passionate about this, I start talking and talking and talking. So incorporating self-care, this is probably the piece that a lot of people are curious about because it's like, I'm so busy, when do I even have time to do self-care? I have so many people I need to take care of, like I don't have time to take care of myself. So, and then I have some clients, usually executives that are like, I'm driven by productivity. I need to be productive. Like relaxing is not like a fun thing for me. It's not a worthy thing of my time. So I like to say, sometimes the most productive thing you can do is relax. And I'm sure you've realized this or seen this play out in your life where sometimes you're working on a project or something and you're just getting so tired. It takes you like 3 hours and it's like, a drudge. But then you approach something another time after having some relaxation, time to step away from it, whatever, and you're able to knock that thing out so fast, like you feel so much more energized, you're able to be more productive. So sometimes, it sounds a little counterintuitive, but the most productive thing you can do is to relax. So then, or to engage in self-care. So then you're actually more productive later. Trying to push through things is not always the most optimal way to go about it. So then thinking about self-care, some people just need to schedule it. So when we think about self-care, it's like this very abstract idea. And when it remains abstract, we're less likely to act upon it. So for some people, I tell them like, break out your calendar, your planner, whatever. You're going to schedule in actual time to engage in self-care. And this is untouchable time, right? So we're putting boundaries around it. So you're scheduling it in and then you're putting boundaries around it, and that you're actually going to do it. You're saving this time. It's sacred time. So even like the busiest executives that I've worked with, it takes a little time to get there, but they realize that, yes, I need to schedule a block of time just for myself, even if it's just to work on their own work instead of managing people. Like, yes, I need this block of time. I have to reserve it. It has to have boundaries around it. I can't let anyone schedule another meeting on top of it, whatever. This is my time. And it makes a huge difference. Like even just that half an hour a day that is untouched just for them makes a huge difference in the rest of their day. It's their time to rest and re-energize, and then they can get back to life. And they're more productive, they're more attuned, they're more attentive. It's just so much better. And sometimes the barrier to engaging in self-care is thinking that self-care is always this like huge, big, time-consuming or expensive thing to do. So we think about like vacations or massages or joining fancy gyms, stuff like that. Like, yeah, that's kind of intimidating. Like if you don't have very much time, thinking about carving out an entire hour or spending a bunch of money or taking 2 weeks off, like that seems way too big of a leap, like way too difficult to do. So I like to talk to my clients about macro and micro self-care. So the macro stuff is the stuff that takes a lot of time. So an hour plus, or even a half hour plus, right? Stuff that takes a lot of time and stuff that takes quite a bit of money, like you have to invest resources in it. So that's harder to do, but something that's a lot easier for people to wrap their head around and fit into their, daily lives when it's super busy is micro self-care. So thinking about those like 2 minutes between meetings where you just sit in your office and breathe, or go hide in a stairwell and breathe, do a meditation where you're eating your lunch for 15 minutes, but you don't have a lot of time to eat, but you're taking those 15 minutes, you're not doing anything else, you're not sitting in front of a computer doing work, it's just 15 minutes to eat. And eat mindfully and really be present as you're eating. Like this is the one thing you're focused on. And surprisingly, like that can feel more restful and re-energizing than taking a half-hour lunch if you're doing other things or distracted or not in a good environment. So I like to talk to my clients about micro self-care. So little things you can kind of weave into your day when you have random time here and there, just to build in little things. Because if you think about it, like I like using these pictures because it's a good visual, like however many teaspoons will eventually equal a ladle of stuff, right? So same kind of thing with self-care. Sometimes we don't have time or energy or money to do the ladle's worth of self-care, but we do have time, energy, money to do the teaspoons worth of self-care. So it just means you need more teaspoons to build up to that ladle worth. So really thinking about ways you can squeeze in little bits and pieces of self-care, like a quick 2-minute phone call or just texting a friend or scrolling and looking at funny memes that make you smile or cute baby animals, that kind of stuff. So when you think about using micro acts of self-care, does it then feel a little more feasible to actually engage in self-care on a regular basis? Like for some people, like this has really been the game changer for them because they're always thinking about the macro self-care, the ladle acts of self-care. And yeah, like when I look at their schedule, they don't have time to do ladle, a ladle worth of self-care, but they absolutely do have time for little teaspoons, because we all have those things. I call them time cracks, those little time cracks, like things between meetings, things between projects, whatever, like a few minutes, even if it's like when we used to have commutes, like commuting to work, that can become a self-care act. You can weave that into what you're doing. All right. So, I'm so happy to see. So when you think about micro acts of self-care, it definitely feels more feasible. Some of you are not quite sure yet. That's okay. Healthy skepticism. There's one person who really is not into it, but I'm really happy to hear that a lot of you are feeling like, okay, yeah, I can do this. Like self-care is possible to integrate into my life. All right, so I know we are just about out of time. So I'm going to breeze through these last few slides because I do want to touch upon them, but I'm not going to dive into it. I apologize. But this is the more advanced stuff. So hopefully you got some good basic information. So when I talk to clients about these more advanced things, we talk about the circle of control. So things you actually have control over, influence over, and things you think about but really don't have any influence over. So like the pandemic, most of us can influence that maybe, or wars going on, things of concern, we don't really have any influence on that, but really we want to focus on things you can actually control. So your thoughts, your words, your behaviors, your reactions, the decisions you make, because everything else is kind of wasted energy. Like if you want the biggest bang for your buck, you got to focus on the things you can actually control. I'm going to skip this. So I'm just going to put all these up here at once. So some things you can do to, when you're feeling a little frazzled or stressed out, that really kind of calms your brain down. Deep breathing. I'm sure you've all heard of that one. Progressive muscle relaxation, a safe place visualization. So just envisioning like a safe place, a relaxing place, a place where you feel really comfortable. Calming music, meditation, and mindfulness. So usually when people think of mindfulness, they're thinking about meditation. Meditation is a type or an act of mindfulness. So when I talk about mindfulness, I have so many clients that hate meditation. So I talk more about mindfulness. So doing things that you normally do mindfully, meaning staying completely in the present and really kind of engaging all 5 of your senses to be in the present moment, grounded in reality, not thinking about the future, the past, whatever else you need to do going on. So my favorite thing is the easiest thing is we all eat, right? So just becoming a mindful eater instead. So sometimes we're eating, we're watching TV, we're doing a little work, whatever, but to really get the bang for your buck, eat mindfully. So really just not doing anything else, really focusing on just eating, smelling it, feeling how it feels in between your hands or your fork or in your mouth, really tasting it, even noticing like, what kind of sound is it making? Is it super crunchy and I'm hearing crunchy noises, or is it like really soft and smooth, and like really using those 5 senses to be mindful? And you can do that with anything. You can mindfully take a shower. You can mindfully wash the dishes. Anything can become a mindful practice, anything that you do normally. So it doesn't have to be like, I'm doing something in addition. It's like another thing I have to do. It's like things you're doing already, just doing them mindfully. I'm going to skip the poll just for time's sake. Some other things you can do to kind of calm down your brain if you're feeling really frazzled, squeezing something like a stress ball, Play-Doh. Kids really love slime these days. So like slime, if you can borrow your kid's slime. Changing your temperature. This is one that not a lot of people know about, but can be extremely effective. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, going and grabbing an ice cube or dunking your hand in ice water, it kind of shocks your system into coming back to reality. So instead of being like so stuck in your mind, it suddenly brings you down right into, it grounds you in the physical world, expelling physical energy. So running around, doing jumping jacks, push-ups, that kind of stuff, like that can kind of get you again out of your head and more into like the physical world. Playing a mind game. So like counting, I mean, this isn't a fantastic mind game, counting backwards from 100 and doing it by sevens or something. So it takes your mind away from past and future and more into present, like real life, physical, right here and now. So those are like kind of mindfulness activities, actually. So grounding activities, I have a blog on my website where it gives you 24 different ideas, and it's like broken down into categories, because there's like soothing grounding practices, physical grounding practices, mental grounding practices, and not every practice is going to work for everyone. So I liked like giving this list to my clients because it gives them an idea of like the 3 different categories, but also like ideas under each of those categories, things that they can try out. So this just kind of speaks to how much our thoughts influence how we feel about ourselves. You hear yourself talking to yourself, you're the person who talks to yourself the most out of everyone, if it's out loud or in your mind, whatever. So the quality of those thoughts, how you talk to yourself, really does make a big difference in your self-care, how you're feeling emotionally, that kind of thing. So some of you have probably seen the cognitive triangle before. It's how our thoughts affect our feelings, affect our behavior, affect our thoughts. It's like everything influences everything. And kind of the easiest way to intercept and break a negative triangle that's going on, that's maybe making you anxious or depressed, is to go in through the thoughts. So I'm going to skip this. Sorry. So one thing to do is thinking about self-compassion. So in the simplest terms, self-compassion is just treating yourself with kindness, recognizing that you are not alone and isolated in this. This is a human experience, and then not getting swept away by whatever feelings. So you can notice that you're feeling anxious or depressed or really down on yourself, but not getting swept away by that emotion, just kind of noticing it non-judgmentally. So in the most essential sense, a lot of people just think about like, how would you treat your friend, right? Like your best friend, if they came to you having made a mistake, you're not going to berate them and say like, I can't believe you did that. That was so stupid. Usually you wouldn't, I would hope. So same for yourself. Like if you made a mistake, like don't berate yourself and say, I can't believe you did that. That was so stupid. Like you're never going to get that promotion, or you're such a bad parent, or whatever. So treating yourself with some compassion. So another thing you can do is, when you're having these unhelpful thoughts, is to challenge it and try to find a more balanced or helpful thought. So these are some questions you can ask yourself to challenge those kind of automatic negative thoughts that pop into your head that make you feel really anxious or make you feel really down on yourself. So is there actually any evidence that supports this or contradicts this? Am I engaging in a really unhelpful pattern of thinking? A lot of times if you're in therapy, like your therapist will help you figure out like, you have a tendency to think this way, you have a tendency to think that way. And is that tendency, your brain is taking a shortcut, right? It's not necessarily reality, but you kind of go there. So am I engaging in one of those things? Would I say this to my friend? Is there another perspective, another way to look at the situation? So the guy who cut you off in traffic, like you can think like, that guy's an ass. Or like you can think, and that'll get you riled up and really angry. Or you can think, oh, that guy is running off to the hospital to see his sister's kid being born, right? Like, and then you calm down and you feel better, or at least not as angry. So, trying to challenge your thoughts, not just accepting them as truth, because oftentimes, because our brain is taking shortcuts, it's not always the truest thing or the most helpful thing that your brain is thinking. So this is meant to represent gratitude practices. So this is something I personally do, and something that a lot of my clients also do and have found to be really helpful. So with gratitude practices, there's actually like science around why this actually helps. And I'll leave this up for a second, but I will scroll to the next one because I know we're out of time. All right, so I just wanted to say thank you so much for everyone coming to listen to this webinar, because I know it's, we're heading into the holidays. You're also very busy and have a lot of competing responsibilities. So just to take out this hour to carve out to listen to this, I'm grateful for that. And I hope you got something out of it, even though I had to rush a little bit at the end. And here's my contact information in case you need to reach out to me or you need a referral for a therapist, something like that. I talk a lot about self-compassion and self-care on my blog. So if you hop on my website, you'll find some more information about that. And I'm always happy to point people to resources as well. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Lee, for that inspiring presentation. Great ideas as we go into the holidays. I love how you covered what is self-care, why is self-care important, ways to think about self-care, incorporating self-care, and advancing self-care. So again, thank you. Now, we do have some time for 3 questions from our viewers. So as well as some questions that came in through the registration site. So for those who are watching right now, we encourage you to enter questions onto the QA box. We'll try to answer as many as we can, but I will assure you that a lot of the cover of material that Dr. Lee covered, she did a great job, and a lot of those questions have been really addressed. But here goes, I'm gonna go ahead and ask the first question, Dr. Lee. One of the pre-registrants asked, how can I best approach a family member or a friend to incorporate self-care techniques into their life? So clearly this is someone who's worried about someone and they're maybe boycotting a little bit of self-care. So what recommendations would you make?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would approach it from a place of, I love you so much and I want the best for you. And I've noticed that maybe you're not taking care of yourself as well as you should or could. Should is kind of a judgy word, so maybe could is a better word. But really coming at it as like, I'm a little worried about you because I'm noticing X, Y, Z, or, even offering to do a self-care thing with them. Like, I found that doing this meditation at, like before I go to bed has been really helpful. Like, I would love for you to come and do it with me one time. Like, would you be interested in inviting them to do self-care with you? Because sometimes for people, I mean, some of it is like maybe they don't think it's important. And for others, maybe they don't realize that they're not taking as good care of themselves. And then for others, they don't even know where to begin. So if you can kind of invite them, draw them into your self-care practices, you can start them kind of on that journey towards figuring out what else might work for them. Maybe the meditation you do at night doesn't work for them, but it makes them curious about other meditations or other mindfulness practices. And you plant that little seed and they might do a little more research and find things that do work for them.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna pick up one of the questions that came in through the chat. And what if one aspect of self-care is a root cause of increased anxiety? For example, budget, money management is a source of anxiety due to job loss, et cetera. So is it still then a part of self-care?
Yeah, so I would say that yes, it's definitely still a part of self-care, because if you think about if you continue to neglect or ignore those aspects of self-care, then you'll find yourself getting into a worse and worse position. So I can even think of a client who like hated money management stuff. It caused him a lot of anxiety because it was a little overwhelming, like thinking about all the parts of his budget and always needing to be mindful of this and that. And what ended up happening is, because he would ignore it, because it brought up a lot of anxiety, he ended up getting into extreme debt. And then you think about, like, if he had done some of that hard work, which is still self-care, he could have prevented getting into that space where he was, unfortunately, like really in debt. So sometimes it helps to, you don't think of this often, but like work with a therapist to work around that anxiety, learning how to manage that anxiety in order to engage in that work of that hard work. I mean, sometimes self-care is hard work, that hard work of budgeting and money management. Because we know if we ignore it, things can get much, much worse. And then it doesn't help us live the life that we're wanting to live.
Very good. Thank you. So I'm going to ask the final questions. I think this is my favorite question. And there were 4 pages worth of questions, Dr. Lee. So I just love how folks are just really wanting information about self-care. And you did a great job of answering and responding to a lot of the questions. Last question is, as a subject matter expert, what is your favorite form of self-care? How does Dr. Lee?
That is such a juicy question. Well, one that I've done for a really long time that I mentioned in the presentation is the gratitude practice. So that's actually something that I started doing in graduate school. Grad school, as some of you can imagine, is very stressful. So I started incorporating this daily gratitude practice where every night before I went to bed, I would journal and write at least 5 things that I was grateful for that day. And some days it was harder than others, but like really exercising that part of my brain and really thinking really carefully about like, what can I be grateful for? It wasn't always like big things. Sometimes I would write like, I saw a really beautiful cloud and it just made me smile, like things like that. But it really does help. I'm a big believer in gratitude and gratitude journals.
Wow. Well, thank you. Much gratitude to you.
Thank you.
All right, Bruins. I'm afraid it looks like our time is up. Dr. Lee, thank you for sharing these great insights and reflections on self-care as we head into our holidays. Thanks also for those of you who joined us for this webinar and this evening. This session is recorded and we will notify you when recording is available on the UCLA Alumni YouTube channel. So we encourage you to stay connected with the Alumni Association on social media. You can find more virtual programming in our UCLA Alumni website, Instagram, and YouTube channels. Finally, a UCLA Alumni Association programs and services are made possible by Bruins like you. So to ensure the future of events like this, please make a gift today by visiting giving.ucla.edu/regional alumni giving. And look for our email following this event and with the links and for more information. Take care, Bruins. Happy holidays and good night. Thank you, Dr. Lee.
Thank you.